Hi, I'm Morgan, and I just finished reading Jane and the Man of the Cloth by Stephanie Barron, and I wanted to give my thoughts on this book. I'm gonna try not to give spoilers. So first of all, this is technically the second book in like a series, but this is the only one of the series that I've actually read. I bought this book at like a Jane Austen event about a month or so ago because it was something a little different than what I normally read, but yet it was still similar enough to stuff that I enjoy that I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give this a chance. This looks intriguing because I do love Jane Austen. I love like the Regency type stuff set in the Regency era essentially, and I loved like how it's written. Like it's supposed to be written from the perspective of Jane Austen, so I gave it a chance, and overall I like this. I'm not someone who normally seeks out mystery books, like that's not my typical genre, but yeah, this is a mystery book like told from the perspective of Jane Austen, and it's written I'm trying to remember if the word for this is like in an epistolary like type of format. It's written not as what's the word? I don't think it's just letters, it's like journal entries. It's essentially a collection of journal entries, I think based off of or vaguely inspired by like Jane Austen's letters. It wasn't entirely clear to me how much of the text was based off of her surviving letters and how much was not. Like it wasn't entirely clear, but there were lots of like little editor's notes referencing her letters. So I'm of the impression that this is at least well-researched historical fiction. Like I don't think it's meant to be historically accurate, but it is, I think, well-researched, and it really, like, there's a lot of world building that I think fits and makes this believable as something set in the Regency era. And I love how the author uses like a lot of like big words that are words that it's like I don't think people normally use in everyday conversation, but they're words that someone who is a writer would use in like while journaling. So like I feel like Stephanie did a really great job of conveying like Jane Austen how she would think, and like but in like a journal type format. Like it read really well. I loved the world building, and I think that the perspective and the choice that the author went with for the characters that she's portraying, it was excellent. Like normally, like how do I put this? Like stories told from the perspective of a journal usually aren't as eloquent and like making sense the entire time throughout as this does. Like, and I love like all the little attention to details. Like this is written as if it was a journal, yet at the same time it's like it's three-dimensional. I get the sense that the narrator is a reliable narrator, which is like it's hard, I think, to create stories like this where like when you are doing a story through a series of journal entries, it's very difficult to have a reliable narrator and to really get across all the little details that someone would want to know about a story. And yet I think that Stephanie does an excellent job of this. There are a couple of criticisms that I do have about this novel. There is one point in the book where a character who I think is from like the first novel in the series shows up, and I had no idea who that character was. Like I feel like there wasn't enough context about that character to readers who are just jumping in and who haven't read the first story, which is one downside there. And a second thing, if I remember it, there was a point where she mentioned like Jane's corset being like too tight or uncomfortable when she was like bending down to pick up something. And if I'm remembering correctly, the Regency era typically it was a transitory period, whereas corsets are like, so if you go into like the Victorian era, people wore what we would consider to be more corsets, but in the Regency era, like structural garments were like less constricting than that. It was kind of, I don't think that they were quite as structured as like the stays of the Georgian period before that. Typically, in the Regency period, like structural garments were more for bust support rather than to like make a waist appear super tiny. So that was one detail where I'm like, I kind of feel like that didn't quite fit with the Regency era. Correction, on page 69, the line I am referring to is, I paused a moment to ease my aching muscles. Such bending and reaching while wearing tight-laced stays can only be called exertion, and glanced back at Lime. And I really love how the author used the correct terminology for the time period here. In the Regency era, they would have been called stays, not a corset, and so I love how the author used the correct terminology. I still stand by the fact that I'm like, why would you be tight lacing for just everyday wear? I don't think people typically would have done that, or at least I don't think someone like Jane Austen, given her character, would have done that. But I really, I love how the author actually used the correct clothing terminology. She really gets her facts correct. I loved, at other points, there were mentions of, taking off, Jane taking off her glove to pick something up in order to avoid getting rust on it, which I thought was so, that shows a lot of research, because it's, in that time period, gloves weren't as easy to wash as they are today. So there were just lots of little details that really, I think, for the most part, helped to set the world as taking place in the Regency era. Yeah, I'm trying to think other things that I really, really liked. I loved I'd say the character dynamics. For instance, it's a lot of this is set it is set in the Regency era, but it's we see references to real characters, and Jane in the novel has a sister named Cassandra, but she also had a sister named Cassandra in real life, and I love the way that they interacted, and it was interesting comparing and contrasting that to, for instance, Elizabeth Bennet and Jane Bennet, the way that they interact in Pride and Prejudice. It was really, I loved the way that the family dynamic of Jane Austen in the story, comparing and contrasting that to Jane Austen's actual fictional characters' families, it was cool for me to think about. And it was also really cool seeing the realities of the class structure of that time period being represented in this book, because it's Jane is free to interact with other people who are wealthy, but it would be weird for her to go and interact with the people in poverty, so she has to actually do this by, if I remember right, volunteering for a church or something. It was really cool to see the realities of classism in early 19th century Britain actually being reflected in the novel. It was so cool to think about, to see this actually accurately represented was fascinating. And I love how this novel, it's so intriguing, because it does have high society British stuff that I love as a form of escapism, but it also has romantic features thrown in, there's a whole backdrop of smuggling and stuff, and there are references to some of the historical stuff that was going on in France during that time period in this book. So it kind of has hints of the Count of Monte Cristo type vibe to it at points, which I thought, I don't know, that's the closest thing I can think of as a comparison. But I love this, and I loved there's so many really interesting details about the geography of the location that really just bleed through into the book. One thing that I kind of dislike about it is the pacing. It is very, I would almost describe it as quite a slow paced towards the beginning, and then really picking up towards the end. So I guess that's something that happens, I suppose, in a lot of books, but it was one where it was kind of slow for me to read. I was reading it like maybe a chapter or two every couple days till the end. Then I'm like rushing through and reading like 3, 4, 5 chapters in like a night. So I would say to expect it to be a bit slow at first, but then really pick up towards the end. But yeah, this was so fascinating, and I love it because it's so different than what I would normally read, yet still something that I enjoyed. So yeah, I would recommend Jane and the Man of the Cloth by Stephanie Barron. It's different. It's different than what I would normally read, but yet it still checks off the boxes of things that I like. Like I love too how it's told from the perspective of like a female character, and it's difficult to have female protagonists set in like 19th century Britain because, and especially like considering the constraints of what was considered acceptable behavior for women in this time period, I love how Stephanie still managed to make Jane like a protagonist who does things even despite what she would or wouldn't, like what she is like permitted by society to do. Like she managed to make her a really great protagonist, even like fulfilling or conforming to Jane's role. It's so fascinating of a book. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would recommend Jane and the Man of the Cloth by Stephanie Barron. So yeah, I'm sorry. I can't like actually read the book for my YouTube channel like out loud because it is protected by copyright. It's not like really, really old, so it's still copyright protected. But yeah, thank you for listening to my thoughts on this book, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye!